Hello, I am Tom Dalling. I'm one of the engineering managers here at Ferocia/Bendigo Bank, and I'm going to give you an abridged history of commands in the UP codebase. For people who aren't aware, UP is a digital banking thingy. It's the app on the phone. There's no branches. That's why it's digital. And yeah, the backend, or at least part of the backend, is a pretty big Ruby monolith, and that's what we'll be talking about today. I've broken this into three parts. First part, I want to talk a bit about the context and background of MVC in Rails, just to set the scene for when the command pattern was introduced. Second part is we'll go through the git commit history of the code base, right from the very first command through all the changes over the years up to what we have today. And then at the last part, I want to look back and think what's gone well, what could have been better. All right, part one. Rails gives you three buckets to put your code into. There's the model bucket, the view bucket, and the controller bucket. And the creator of Rails, DHH, he's basically of the opinion that that's all you need, just these three buckets. So yes, there can be some libraries and stuff on the side for specific things, but for the most part, your application code will fit into one of these three buckets. As Rails apps grow, you always hit this certain point where things are getting more complex. Maybe you add more engineers, maybe just the app is more featureful, and the business logic gets quite complicated. And that brings up the question, like, where should it go? Like, which one of these three buckets should it go into? DHH, creator of Rails, says you should do the fat model pattern, which is basically you take all your business logic and you put it straight into the active record models. That's sort of like his preferred approach. People have tried this for 15 to 20 years, however long Rails has existed, and it does work, but there are problems with putting everything into your models. I think probably the most like obvious problem is that you end up with God models, which are huge models. They're just like one or two in the code base that become really large and really unwieldy. Usually one of the God models is user, and users are involved in everything that your app does, so it makes sense that all the business logic would end up there. And the other one that you usually see is the main model for whatever your app does. So if you're a bank, maybe it's like transaction. The transaction model gets massive. So people try this fat model approach for a while. It kind of works, but there's drawbacks. And people start thinking, like, where else could you put the business logic? And it's not the views. I think it's pretty obviously not the views. But the controllers, that's also a semi-natural place where you might put this. It does fix the problems with having those massive like God models, but this has its own drawbacks. Like the reusability of the business logic is not very good. You have to make like HTTP requests to run the business logic. They're not separate. So there's no like ideal place to put this. Which has led people to search for the fourth bucket, which is where you put your business logic that doesn't fit into model, view, or controller. People have been searching for this for like quite a long time, and there's various different approaches with different names. Probably the most common approach is called service objects, which is just you have a directory, you put in usually like plain Ruby objects in there, and all your business logic goes into that directory. There's also the interactor design pattern, which I think is a Martin Fowler one, maybe. There's gems for it, like it's a different approach to this. UP ended up calling them commands, but there's also a few other names. There's a few things that like people have tried over the years. Cool. So that brings us up to the UP code base. And I'm going to start right back in the beginning with the very first command that was ever written in the UP code base. A couple of things to point out are that this is in a namespace called engine command. It's just an empty namespace. It is a plain Ruby class that doesn't inherit from anything. And it just has this one class method called run up here, which takes some arguments, it does some stuff, changes the database, and that's it. No instance methods, it's just this one class method. And this was introduced in 2017 by Langers, one of the original engineers on the UP project. And the commit message for this is kind of telling, and we'll come back to this later, but he said, move create transaction class out to its own file so I can add new functionality in a clearer way. This is getting at like the fourth bucket problem, right? Like this domain logic is becoming complicated. I want to put it somewhere else. And chose command as mutation is already used in the graph code and felt we should differentiate between the two. So UP uses GraphQL quite extensively for the customer-facing stuff, which has this concept of mutations. And Langers was considering calling these commands mutations. He didn't want to call them commands maybe in the early days, but decided to call them commands because mutation was already taken. Like there was already a concept that existed. So this kind of says to me that the original intent was for commands to be commands in like the CQRS sense, where they change things. They're meant to mutate the system. A couple of weeks later, the second command written was basically the same structure as the first, but the third one was a little bit different. So the first like evolution is that we still have that class method run, but it takes all of the arguments, forwards them into the constructor to make a new instance, and then it calls instance method run. This is a pretty common pattern in Ruby. If you've been doing Ruby for a length of time, like this would be pretty natural to you. So yeah, this is like a natural progression of just how you write stuff in Ruby. So yeah, this was 2 weeks later by Langers as well. At the same time, so Langers is working on the core engine bits, maybe the customer-facing stuff. But at the same time, we're also working on the back office parts, the admin area of the application. And we're running into the same problems there. I'm pretty sure it was Neil. Neil was here a second ago, but yeah. So in the admin area, we had the same thing of complex domain logic that we wanted to pull out into a separate area. And Neil added the interactor gem. So that's how we decided to deal with it there. But 6 months later, that complicated logic, the part that was written in interactor gem, the complicated part was kind of deleted because we didn't need it anymore. And there was a few other bits, but not really enough left to justify having a whole gem for it. So it's been 6 months. This command thing is kind of taking off. Neil just decided to convert them all over into commands and delete the interactor gem. All right, 2 years later, we're up to 94 commands. And there's a minor change here by Langers again. These were in a namespace called engine command, but at some point this engine concept didn't seem to make sense anymore and it was just deleted. So we ended up with the global command namespace that we have today. Another 2 years go by. We're up to 480 commands written now. And I want to point out that at this point, it's still no base class. These are just plain old Ruby objects. They don't include any particular like modules or mixins or anything. It's just a pattern that engineers are using, putting files in a particular folder that are structured a particular way. The next major change is that at this point, we were adopting sorbet into the code base. And the difference here with commands is that we started using tstruct. So this comes from sorbet. It's a typed struct subclass. You inherit from it, and then you can do these const customer, const label, like typed properties of the command. The problem with that is that when you're doing this pattern where you forward the arguments from the class method to the instance method, sorbet didn't get it. So the typing didn't work properly. It didn't understand the types of the class method. It knew the types of the like instance method stuff, but not the class method. So this module was introduced here. It just codifies that function as an object pattern, but it's not really there for the code. It's more as a way to tag this class, this command class, as something for a custom sorbet plugin to fix. So we wrote a custom sorbet plugin that fixed up all the typing stuff, and it worked with sorbet, but you had to include this command runnable module for it to work. And this was introduced by DBS in 2021. I've put in the people's faces because I gave this at a lightning talk here, and everyone knows everyone's face, so it's less relevant here, but some of the people here will recognize it. Another year goes by, about another 150 commands, and we see the next iteration of commands. So that tiny little module that DBS made that was not really important, it was just for sorbet, methods start getting added to it. And the first couple of methods are ones for running commands as background jobs. So you have this like class level DSL here, define job, you give it a priority. And now instead of calling .run, you can call .run later. And that will queue it up in a background job and run it with Q, I think was the gem at the time. And this was introduced by AS in 2022. 1 year goes by, and it was a big year because the number of commands increased by like double, basically. And we see the next change. This one is adding Datadog tracing by default to all of the commands. There's like a class level option. You can turn it on and off, but it's on by default. And all it does is it wraps all the code in Datadog tracing so that we get good observability in production. We can see like performance characteristics. We can see like how often it's called, when there's problems. It just helps with debugging. And this was introduced by David Cristofaro in 2023. And that was the last change, which brings us 2 years later up to today, where we have about 1,135 commands. That command runnable module is 108 lines of code long, and it basically gives you just 4 things. It makes sorbet work properly. It gives you that like function as an object design pattern out of the box. You can run your commands as background jobs, and you get the free Datadog tracing. That's where we sit today with the upcode base. So part 3, let's have a look back and see what worked and what could be better. I think like the overall opinion that I have of this is that it's okay. It does the job. It's pretty good. We needed a 4th bucket. It is a 4th bucket. It keeps the models, controllers, GraphQL stuff relatively simple. It's nice and reusable, so you can call the same command from either GraphQL or Rails controllers. Like, yeah, it did the job. The other nice thing is that it's small. So 8 years of doing commands, and the only like base class or module or whatever is this one little module that is 108 lines of code. That's not very much code. Like you can read all of that. It's not too hard. There's very few methods on it. Most of them are about the running them as background jobs. There's a small handful. And it's been relatively easy for people earlier in their career to just like naturally pick up the pattern. You don't have to train them. They just see how it's used. Simple, they use it. Nice. This isn't specific to our implementation, but whenever you pull out the business logic into somewhere else, it just becomes a bit more testable. You can test the business logic in isolation from where it's called from. So you don't have to make like a HTTP request to test a Rails controller or a GraphQL mutation. You just test the logic directly, which is faster. The tests run a bit faster, not super, super fast, but faster than they would have. And it's simpler to write the tests. You don't have complicated setup. You don't have to like fake out requests or anything like that. And lastly, that Datadog observability is really nice. We have really good observability because it's the easiest thing to do. Like people are just using commands. They might not even realize that they're adding Datadog tracing. It's just there, which means that basically everything is traced already. When we need to debug things in production, it's really good. When we need to look at performance in production, also really good. So now on to the things that could be better. I think probably the worst thing about the commands that we have in op is the name, because the name is very generic and it can mean a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. For example, if you were to Google command pattern because you wanted to learn more about it, the first thing that comes up is the gang of 4 command pattern from the book, which is not what this is. It's completely different. So that's not good. If we have new people joining the company, they're trying to do research and Googling it, they won't find the right stuff. The other thing that it is commonly confused with is the CQRS pattern, Command Query Responsibility Segregation. Commands are a specific thing in CQRS, and our commands in the up code base are not that. They're close, but they're not exactly the same thing, and that does confuse people. It confused me when I joined the company for sure. There's also a specific meaning in event sourcing. So, we're a bank, you think financial stuff, they're probably doing event sourcing. Maybe it's that. It's not that. It's something else. So the juniors don't have a problem with it because they don't bring in context from a long career, but the people who do have long careers bring in the context and they get confused by what exactly is a command? Like, when am I supposed to use it? What can I expect from it? That sort of thing. And that brings me to the commands have kind of devolved to not mean anything. I think the original intent from Langers was that it was supposed to be like the CQRS thing. It was supposed to be, these have side effects, they mutate the system. But that was lost over time. We now have commands that don't contain any business logic. They're used for other things. We have some commands that don't mutate the system. They have no side effects. They're just pure functions called for their return value. And we even have some commands that are being used as queries. So that's really confusing if you expect them to be like commands from CQRS, right? Where it's actually both sides in the same thing. We had an engineer that had been here for about a year, and he mentioned, like, I've been here for a year and I'm still trying to understand what a command is in the code base. And because Az is a jokester, he said it's Ruby code. And he's 100% correct. Like, you can't really say more about them other than it's a bit of code. It's just code. There's nothing more special about it than that. And I think the reason why we ended up in that situation is that the concept was never documented in the early days. So if you look at the module right now, you will see documentation for all of the individual methods, but like the concept of what is a command supposed to be and what isn't it, that was never written down until very recently. And we relied on tribal knowledge within the company to spread that knowledge around. So back when Ferocia was less than 10 engineers, so just a single team, everyone talked to everyone on a daily basis, everyone reviewed everyone's code. It was very easy to sort of spread that knowledge around. But as the company's grown, tribal knowledge just becomes less and less effective. We can't rely on just people telling other people about things and not having it written down. So I think that's kind of contributing to where we are now. A couple of other small things. If you have a command that's called from two different places, you probably don't want to duplicate the validation in those two places. You want to like unify it and put it in the one place, which is the command. But there is no built-in mechanism for doing that in commands. So without any built-in validation stuff, people just start throwing exceptions. Like, if this is nil, throw an exception. If this is too long, throw an exception. And I think this might be my personal opinion, but I think that's a really terrible way to do validation. It also doesn't integrate really nicely with where the validations end up. So if you're calling this from, say, a GraphQL mutation, you want to return like errors in the response, you need to translate those exceptions into the error response, or you might translate them into Rails model validations. There's nothing to do that like automatically. It's all ad hoc code. So you manually raise the exception, you manually catch the exception, you manually turn it into the error that you want it to turn into, which I don't think is a great situation. And lastly, this might also be just an opinion of mine, but I think that conflating business logic with background jobs is a bad thing. I think they're two different concepts. So not all commands or business logic are background jobs, and not all background jobs are commands or business logic. There's certainly a lot of overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing. So you run into a situation where you're an engineer, you want to make a background job, you know you need a background job, and you look at the code base to find how to do that, and you see commands. So you go, okay, I will include command runnable in my background job class, and now I can run it as a background job. But that wasn't a command. That was never a command in the first place. It was sort of the cart leading the horse. And the reason why you can tell that these two concepts are separate is because you can't take commands and turn them all into background jobs. And the reason for that is that background jobs have to serialize their arguments, and not all of the commands have arguments that can be serialized. Also, some commands sort of expect to be run in the context of a request or maybe within a transaction. And when you turn it into a background job, that doesn't work anymore. It all just falls over. So I think these are separate concepts. I would like to keep them separate, but maybe everyone doesn't agree with me. So that brings me to the end. I'm going to give it an overall score of a B. I can't give it an A. There's definitely some improvement to be done there, but overall, I think it does the job. Like, it's good enough. It's scaled up to like 1,000 commands. It works. It works. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Doing questions? Hello? Oh,
hello.
It's cool. A little GameCube. So all the things at the end where you listed the things that were bad about it, like what would you change if you had the hindsight? Like what would you call it, for example?
I would probably, like, if it was me personally, I would probably still call them commands. I would just be more strict about what they actually are. Like, define the concept more strictly, and don't have any commands that are just pure functions. Don't have any like background jobs that kind of are commands. I just make it more defined personally.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes you feel any better, we also implemented a command pattern the same kind of way and had the same issues that you listed.
Yep.
So it's kind of like we added tracing and background jobs into it as well. So it's kind of good to see other people making the same kinds of mistakes as we did.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that really got me was we got up to 400 commands without a base class or anything. And I was like, good job, early Ferocians. And then at the 400 command point, we had to do something for sorbet, like some little sorbet fix. And then once that module existed, that's when stuff started getting added in. Like, yeah, we got so far, but didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Quick one. Actually, you just mentioned that about the 400 something that were isolated classes. What happened with them after you had the base class? You just updated all of them? Was it immediate? How long it took to update all of them?
I didn't dig into that part of the history specifically, but I can talk about what the code base looks like now. I think probably most of them have been converted over to use that module. Not 100%. We do have some commands that don't use it, probably like really old ones. Also, we have some jobs that were written before commands could be used as jobs, and they still exist. But I don't know, for the most part, like maybe 80%, 90%, they're using the new thing. I'm not sure exactly how long that took, but yeah.
Thanks for sharing the history of your command pattern. So I quite like that. So I use command pattern for a long time, and as the code base evolve, you probably have hundreds or thousands command. And you're basically, when we implement the command pattern, we follow the single responsibility principle, right? But then you probably have command to call other command. And so my question is, how would you organize so many commands, and what's your opinion on organizing?
Yeah, that's certainly what we have now. Like, I think most of them you would say are roughly a single responsibility, but some of them obviously have grown and got a bit bigger. Commands do call other commands. One of the things that I didn't show here is that the code base is actually broken up into sort of like vertical slices that we call features. So in a typical Rails application, you've got like models directory, views directory, controllers directory. We have a directory called features, and then underneath each individual feature, we have models, view, controller. So that's one way of organizing it, right? Is you split the app into different areas or different domains, and then each domain has its own set of commands. I think that works pretty well. I'm a fan of that pattern. But yeah, I think that sort of avoids the problem of you just have the one single namespace and 1,000 commands in one area. That's a bit hard to navigate, but breaking it up by feature, I think is manageable.
Yeah. Okay. Second question. So I also tried Sorbet before and trying to adopt it in my Rails application. So I'm quite interested in your journey. Was the Sorbet only applied to your command pattern, or is the whole Rails application?
So like right now, does Sorbet apply to everything?
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to 100% for sure. I think the general guidance is that new stuff should be written in Sorbet. We have some older stuff. We probably also have a few engineers who don't like Sorbet. I'm one of them, but I'm post-technical. I don't write code anymore. You can't blame me. But yeah, so there's no hard rule that says you have to use Sorbet, but I would say majority of stuff is now. Yeah.
Thanks.
Good talk. Got two questions. First one, if you're going to adopt commands, services, whatever you call them, would you go for build your own or go for a gem that provides sort of base functionality?
I personally really like building your own, but I guess that's because I get to choose how it's built, right? So I like the plain old Ruby object approach, like having no base class, having nothing complicated to understand. I think that is my preferred approach. Having said that, I don't hate the interactive gem. Like, I think it's nice. Yeah. I don't have strong opinions either way, but if I had to pick one, I would say plain old Ruby objects, just roll it yourself. Yeah.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Second question, if I can.
Yep.
You mentioned vertical slicing. What happens if you want to share a command between different vertical slices?
I think it just ends up in one of them, and you can call it from anywhere. So it's not like pack work where it enforces public, private, and a boundary. It's like everything's available to be called, so you just call it from another slice. That's how it works currently.
I'm not going to argue. think it's down the end. Someone want to?
While the cube goes across the room, our remote viewer Tim would like to know if Tom offers the service to score various aspects of his life.
What's that?
Tim would like to know if you offer scoring various services of people's lives.
Oh yeah,
service.
Yeah. Is this Tim Riley by any chance?
I cannot confirm or deny.
Well,
it's just Tim.
No matter which Tim this is, A plus question, and yes, I do.
In this discussion of having objects that do things versus objects that represent things, a natural point of discussion is dependency injection. Did you have that discussion here, and what were the outcomes of that discussion?
I haven't ever seen it discussed here. So from the beginning, it was like a pretty standard Ruby thing where there was no dependency injection. It's just like global namespace of stuff. You call what you need to call. Yeah, I can't remember ever having that discussion here. You're probably talking about the dry RB stuff. I'm guessing that's what you're getting at. Okay, well, they have like extensive dependency injection thingies, and that is also really nice for like isolated testing. When I said that the commands are easier to test, but maybe not super fast, this is why. Like, it's not 100% isolated. It does hit the database. It does a bunch of stuff. It calls other commands. So it's faster, but not as fast as if you had done proper dependency injection. I don't know. People here, I think don't like it. I'm kind of neutral, and I could go either way.
If you were to run a tool like Flay over the code base looking for duplication of all these 1,000 commands in all the different features, would it find any? Is the code dry?
I think for the most part, yes. let me think what would be duplicated. Maybe like a little bit of the validation stuff. So checking things, raising exceptions, but that's pretty minimal. Yeah, I don't think so. I think it would be pretty dry. Yeah.
Hello. I love this pattern and the feature separation. We implemented that at GreenSync.
Nice.
I was wondering particularly how you would foresee a better solution for the validation things going into.
Yeah. That is a tricky one. As I was writing that slide, I was thinking, what would I actually do here? And I probably don't have a good answer. What I was thinking at the time was that commands are actually a layer below validation. Validation happens at the boundary, and then commands in the domain, like they probably shouldn't be doing validation. Like by the time you get to a command, you've already passed the user input that should have been validated. So I would say maybe just duplicate it. Maybe just do the validation twice. It depends where it's coming from, right? Like they're probably not exactly identical. Like you probably do want to do slightly different validation depending on if it's GraphQL versus whether it's a Rails controller. So I would just duplicate it. I don't think it's a common enough problem that you really need to dry it up that much.
Yeah, we had REST API structure validation in dry schema, and then we're a bit torn between dry validation and like doing it within our commands, which we call transactions. Like doing that validation there, because it's like, separating the schema from the business logic validations. Like you kind of needed some of the things that it was loading up in the transaction to validate against. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. Is like I said, I don't have like a great answer, but if I had to summarize it, I would say there's a boundary where user input crosses, you validate at that point, everything inside you just accept it. Yeah. Cool.
The last question, anyone?
Hello. So this is kind of around validations, but it's more about returning errors than anything. We have experimented with using the active model error pattern to return errors, because even though you might not need validations, there still could be an issue with one of the parameters, which you don't know until you call it. So we've tried using that to surface. I'm not sure if we adopted it everywhere, but I think the validations is more about surfacing errors in a structured way so the consumer can do something useful with it.
Yeah. This is a bugbear of mine, and I don't write code much anymore, so I don't have to worry about it. I can sleep easy. But back in the day, I really, really wish we had some kind of like standardized error structure, like a gem or something that you could integrate it with the Rails models. You could integrate it with dry-RB stuff. You could return it from your commands. Like I wish we had a standard way of representing that. The closest that I can think of is this active record. What is it called? Active model.
Active model
validations. Or
it's not necessarily validations, but there's the errors.
The object
structure.
Yeah. That's kind of the closest that I've.
Yeah, it's not great though, but
yeah, there's problems, but it's okay.
Sorry, I do have just one question. When you're not dealing with Golang, so you're not forced to recover from exceptions. What infrastructure have you built to make sure that they don't propagate unexpectedly if you're dealing with this validation?
Well, it depends what you mean by make sure.
Paranoia.
I think Ruby makes this extremely difficult because you don't have that compiler. Nothing's checking that you've handled all of the exceptions. It's like sorbet is not going to catch it, as far as I know. Like I'm not a sorbet person, but I don't think sorbet is capable of doing that. I would actually answer this by saying that we release the way that you release code is how you de-risk that from happening. Very small steps, use feature flags to turn them on and off again if you run into problems. Like, yeah, you're trying to detect it in production and have very minimal impact in the event that you do hit a problem in production. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Awesome. Thank you.